So this week you've been reading Leibniz's Discourse on Metaphysics and his short piece called The Monadology. Leibniz was an extraordinary thinker, inventor, mathematician, co-discoverer independently of the infinitesimal calculus along with Isaac Newton, which led to great controversies. So take a little time to go online and read up a little bit about Leibniz's biography. You'll find him an extraordinary individual. And his theories, his metaphysical theory, is quite an extraordinary theory too, quite a fanciful theory. You might wonder how anyone could come up with this. In many ways it probably seems quite implausible to you, and there are certainly implausible elements of it. But as you read it and think about his arguments, try to keep in mind also what are the questions and the problems that Leibniz is trying to solve. Leibniz is an inheritor, a rationalist, essentially, like Spinoza and Descartes. Like Spinoza, he has an extraordinarily optimistic outlook on what is possible for the human mind, on the possible extent of human knowledge. Leibniz, who devised the infinitesimal calculus, also thought that we could devise a kind of a mathematical calculus that would solve not just mathematical problems, but that would give us insight into all things, any sort of question about the world that we might have. He thought that this was something that could ultimately at some time be developed, and he spent time working on this impossible dream of a universal calculus that would solve any question, any problem that the human mind might come up with. So this extraordinarily optimistic view about what's possible for the human mind. And as you look at the kind of fantastic theory about monads that he develops, keep in mind again the problems that he is addressing, the problems inherited from Descartes. In particular, the issue of the relationship of mind and body, and how we can explain the structure of the world given this relationship. Leibniz did not exactly deny the freedom of the will and declare everything to be utterly determined in exactly the way that Spinoza did. He has a more robust conception of freedom of the will than Spinoza, so in that respect he's a little bit closer than Descartes. You remember again that Descartes draws this sharp distinction between mind and body, in part in order to be able to try to assert that the physical world, the material world, is determined, acts out of necessity in accordance with the laws of nature, while the human mind is free and can choose freely without any kind of external constraints whatsoever. So Leibniz is closer than Spinoza to that, and his monadology, his theory about the structure of the universe being expressed through these monads, is a way of answering that issue. There are all kinds of issues, as we saw, that come up with the mind-body problem as it's formulated, as it's created, in effect, by Descartes. Okay? How do these two very different substances interact, mind and body? How is it that something that's immaterial but can think senses something that is a physical cause, has a material cause, right? When you stub your toe, why do you feel it, okay? And when you decide to do something, why does your material body act in accordance with that decision? If everything that happens in the physical world is indeed determined and by antecedent physical causes, how can it be that the mind can intervene in nature and cause things in the physical world to happen without somehow violating the determinism of that natural necessity? It's not clear, any of this. So Leibniz's solution to this was the concept of the monad. A monad is an entity that is dimensionless, okay, so it's like an infinitesimal in that way. It's dimensionless, it has an external aspect and it has an internal aspect. these do not interact in any way. So there's a mind aspect and there's a body aspect. There's no interaction that goes on between them. So Leibniz's solution to the mind-body problem, it resembles in a way perhaps Spinoza's. Right? For Spinoza, the solution is that mind and body are simply are not substances at all. They're two of the infinite attributes of God, so they exist in parallel. For Leibniz, God is not the only substance. There's a virtually infinite, there's a countless number of substances. Each monad is an individual substance. And they have an internal aspect, which is the mental aspect, and an external aspect, which is the physical aspect. But these do not interact. So the problem about interaction is solved by saying that there is no interaction. But if there is no interaction, we have to ask why and how then is there a correlation between the mental and the physical? Why do monads seem to behave in a way that harmonizes their actions? Why does the physical world correspond so neatly to our mental world? And Leibniz's solution to this is that the world was created this way. And that's at the root of his argument that this is the best of all possible worlds. A claim that earned him much sarcasm, especially from Voltaire, in whose play Candide there is a character by the name of Dr. Pangloss, a spoof of Leibniz, who declares that this is the best of all possible worlds. Any one of us might look about the world and think that there are lots of ways that we might improve it. So the argument for that this is the best of all possible worlds essentially goes something like this. So for Leibniz, so God had to create, when faced with a choice about what world to create, God has to have a reason to choose the world that's created over any alternative. So the infinite mind of God creating the universe is able to survey all of the possible worlds that could exist. Those possible worlds, are really basically an infinite number too. There are not all worlds that you could sort of formulate in words that would be possible. So for example, the world in which I am seated here on this chair, and the world in which at the same time I am standing rather than seated, those would be different worlds, different possible worlds. A world in which I'm doing both at the same time, well, it doesn't seem that that would be possible. So God can't violate the laws of logic. He can't create a world in which contradictions exist. Everything has to be compossible. Everything has to be able to exist together. So surveying the totality of all of the possible worlds, if God's to create a world at all, he has to have a reason to choose the one that was created over all of the alternatives. If there were no reason to choose one over the others, then there would have been no creation. Leibniz certainly believes, like Einstein later asserts, that God doesn't play dice. There's no chance in the matter here. So since God has to have a reason to choose the world that in fact was chosen, the only reason that there could be for that is that this is the best choice. Therefore, believe it or not, according to Leibniz, this has to be the best of all possible worlds. Next time we'll say a little bit more about this concept of monads, the monads that God created when he created the world according to the metaphysical theory of Leibniz.